So looking specifically then at the rejection of Cochrane Reviews, I just want to make it very clear that there's maybe an element of confusion when we talk about rejection and withdrawal. So rejection of Cochrane Reviews is specifically applicable only to unpublished protocols, reviews and updates. So you would only talk about withdrawing a published review or protocol. So specifically, we're looking at unpublished drafts of protocols, and we're really hoping to employ some consistency across Cochrane review groups, including transparency around decision making and clarity for authors who may submit to more than one Cochrane review group. But really, the overall aim of this is to empower Cochrane review groups to manage their resources much more effectively, to stop spending quite as much time on really troublesome reviews and give you some tools that enable you to reject those effectively and work with the authors in order to do that in the best way possible. So we'll talk a little bit more about communication with authors and about their right to appeal as well, so that the appeals process. But in brief, the rejection policy is talking about drafts of reviews, protocols and updates, and they can be rejected at any time. The Cochrane Review Group has the right to reject them at any time during the pre-publication process. And there is no guarantee of publication. So that means that if you've published a protocol, it doesn't mean that you have the right to publish your Cochrane Review if it's not up to scratch. And likewise, if you published a Cochrane Review, there's no guarantee that the update that you produce will be published if it's not up to scratch either. So the criteria for rejection fall into four main groups, and they are quality, timeliness, competence and ethics. And I'll give some examples of those on the next slide. What we have set out in the policy is that authors can publish their rejected drafts elsewhere. And I think Anupa will talk a bit more when we come to the email templates. But we think this is important if authors have invested a large amount of time in it. But there are certain things that must be followed in order for them to do that. And the first is that the CRG has to stipulate whether they do or do not want to be credited or acknowledged in a journal publication. And also that the authors must not call it a Cochrane review because it hasn't passed through Cochrane's rigorous quality processes. But they can take essentially the systematic review and publish it elsewhere if they are successful in that. But at the same time, CRGs can engage another author team to take over the same title. And that's whether it's a review or an update or a protocol at any stage. CRGs have the right to engage another author team to take that on. And there are some complicated scenarios about who owns previous work. And if you do have any queries around that, then do come to us and we can work through it together, because it's very much the case that every single case is different. So we probably need to look at that on a one-on-one basis. And the rejection policy, as published in the EPPR, also contains guidance on implementation, which includes how to record decisions and information in Archie. So some of the example reasons for rejection. The first one is quality. And we've defined it here as the CRG identified concerns with the draft review which are not satisfactorily addressed by the authors. And a real example of this might be that you receive the first draft of the review and you have severe concerns about data extraction. There are inconsistencies before you even get to looking at data analyses. There are big red flags there. And at that point, before even peer review, you can reject the article. A big one that we see is timeliness. So authors cannot comply with agreed editorial timelines with no reasonable explanation for the delay. And we see this time and time again where protocols do not progress to Cochrane reviews in a timely way, and then the draft Cochrane review can be rejected. And the third criteria is competence. So authors do not provide adequate responses to feedback from the CRG, including to peer reviewer comments and requests for progress reports. So this really is particularly when peer reviewer reports come back and the authors respond to them in an adequate way, and those points really aren't addressed, perfectly within your rights to reject the review. And the fourth one is research and publication ethics. And an example of this is it comes to light that an author is employed by the manufacturer of the intervention. It has happened that occurs quite late on in the process, in which case, again, it's the criteria for rejecting. We're going to move on a little bit and speak about rejection actions in Archie. And for that, I'm going to hand over to Anupa to talk through the slides. Thanks, Anupa.
So moving on to the next set of slides, which focus on Archie and are probably more relevant to editorial staff, such as managing editors. The rejection policy states that 2 CRG editors have to agree to reject a piece of work. Once this decision has been made, the following 3 actions need to be taken in Archie. The first and most important action is to notify the author team, including all co-authors, of this decision. We do suggest that you inform the whole team rather than just the lead contact person, because there have been instances where the information has not trickled down to the rest of the team. It is recommended that this is done via the workflows in Archie. The second task is to record this action in Archie and then to abort the in-progress workflow for the review. To communicate the decision to the authors, a number of email templates for rejection have been created by Any Support, covering all the rejection scenarios that Bryony mentioned earlier. So each of these 4 review and protocols have additional templates attached to them. So if we look on the next slide, these email templates can be found in Archie by clicking the CRG name and selecting Edit Task Email Template. The templates are generic ones and therefore need to be copied before they can be edited to fit in with the group's own communication style. Just a reminder that there are recorded webinars on how to use and edit email templates on the training website. So then we're going to move on to the second task, which is to create a new administrative note using the note type Editorial Management to record the reasons that led to the rejection of the protocol or review. This should be a concise factual description of what preceded the decision to reject, and if the protocol or review was rejected for reasons specific to the author team, add a factual note to the property sheet of the relevant person records in Archie. And it's important to include factual information, as this type of note can be read by other editorial staff, and there is a need for transparency between CRGs. This could be helpful in a situation where an author team or their work has been rejected by one CRG, then decide to approach a different CRG. One question that was asked in the first webinar was if some suggested text for reasons for rejecting could be made available to place in the administrative note. And our response to this is that we will monitor usage and then perhaps build up a list of reasons for people to select from. The final action in Archie is to abort the in-progress workflow for the review, as it will no longer be needed. Outside of Archie, the editor-in-chief should be notified of any rejection decision, and this is for recording purposes only. As this is a new policy, we want to know how many reviews are rejected, at what stage, and for what reason. My last slide, which was just a take-home message, was in terms of the rejection policy, our take-home message is to reject early and communicate the decision to the author team clearly, and hopefully this will avoid awkward situations later. And hopefully by utilising the rejection policy, it will conserve CRG resources in the long run and help groups to focus on priority reviews and reviews that will have a greater impact.